Who's that coming down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a mean machine in red and black. Mean machine in red and black. Ain't nothing finer in the land. Ain't nothing finer in the land. Than the drunk obnoxious Georgia fans. Than drunk obnoxious Georgia fans. Go, go! Go, go!
What's up, y'all? This is John back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. Tonight we are talking to Dan from As for Football podcast, website, just general media outlet that covers Army sports, just in general, correct?
Correct. Well, I mean, obviously we focus on football, but
Right.
we talk about football is what people want to talk about, but we'll talk about anything.
I gotcha. So before we get into it, tell me a little bit about your backstory. Like, how'd you get into covering Army sports?
Well, okay, so I'm a member of the West Point class of 1995. Swam while I was there. Kind of disconnected from the academy and all the Army stuff after I got out. And finally, my wife dragged me back to a game in 2013. And I realized while we were there that I didn't know who was on the field or like why things were happening. And I'm a writer, so in trying to figure it out, I started writing about it, and that got out of control. So I was writing on my personal blog, picked up a little following, got to the point where people were offering me jobs to come write for them, and I took the one with As for Football because I could be a partner in a venture rather than me building a website while you pay me something nominal. I'll just take the risk and we'll just build this thing together. And now I'm the managing partner. So yeah, it's been good.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, so let's just go ahead and jump right into the game. A little bit into Army season so far because this has been as good of a season as you could really imagine for Army. 12-1, only loss being to Notre Dame. Noted hater of the military and Department of Defense with what they've done this season. Won the American Conference, which is the first conference championship in the program's history. Multiple national titles, one conference championship. And then on top of that, you've had the joy of watching Bryson Daly play football all season, leading the country in rushing yards by a quarterback, and just in general, most rushing touchdowns in the country. So, how much fun has this season been as an Army fan?
Oh man, it's been awesome. And they've struggled the last 2 years. Like the wheels never came off, but they've been 6-6 2 years in a row. And the NCAA changed the cut blocking rules because Power Five programs don't want to get beat. No, they don't want to get cut. They don't want to deal with it. So they changed the cut blocking rules, and Army really struggled with that because Army guys not typically as big as like your Power Five guys or even your higher end Group of Five guys. And so it took them a little while. I mean, I would say it took them a solid 18 months, year and a half to sort of work through what they wanted to do. They tried sort of sticking with what they were doing and doing cut blocking that's legal in the box, but head up blocking outside. And that was 2022, and it didn't really work. So then they got a new offensive coordinator and they tried to go to like a shotgun option look. And part of that worked, like the offensive line, new zone blocking scheme that worked pretty well. But the rest of what they were trying to do relied on them throwing much, much, much more than you're used to seeing with Army. And so this year they've gone back to the flex bone, but retain the zone blocking scheme. So they block like humans, not like, not diving at people's knees, which is, good and bad. But the offensive line is like 15 to 20 pounds heavier per guy. And they're just recruiting a different type of lineman. And they've been able to make that work with the flex bone against everybody except Notre Dame. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I on this show we're not fans of Notre Dame. We don't think they're really that great of a team. They just kind of
If they had been able to cut black on the edges, I expect that would have been a different game. I mean, I don't know if you watched it, but they
yes.
just the offensive line did okay. Bryson Daly did okay. The problem is everything else that they tried to do basically got either smoked on the outside by a cornerback beating the block or chased down from behind by, like a safety or a linebacker coming up on the outside, on the backside. In either case, the answer is to have a slot back cut that guy, but they outlawed cut blocking and they couldn't do it. So,
And when Army drove in that game, there was nothing Notre Dame could do to stop them. Like they were,
well,
when it was working, Notre Dame was clueless.
I mean,
It just didn't
Army's
work
got a
out.
good team. They got a good offensive line. It's just, I mean, they were giving up probably 6 inches and 50 pounds per guy.
Yeah,
So it's not like there's not a solution. It's just that the NCAA outlawed what that solution is supposed to be. So,
right. So getting into the passing game just a little bit, in some games this season, Army has had significantly higher passing numbers than in other games. What dictated the difference between the games?
so this has been the first year I think I've ever seen where the Black Knights will just take what the defense is giving them within the scheme of the triple option. I mean, they're going to mostly run the flex bone, but there have always been ways to pass out of the flex bone. But like if you watch the Tulsa game, Tulsa came in and they just jammed the line of scrimmage and said, "We're not going to let you run on us under any circumstances." And Army struggled to run up the middle because, jam the box. So they threw out of that and smoked those guys, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think they probably completed 60-65% of their passes, a couple of passing touchdowns, forced those safeties to back off and play the pass because they were losing. Well, that's the first time you've ever seen the Black Knights really do that. That's really where Bryson Daly is different than a lot of other Army quarterbacks, is that he can make those passes, short passes, long passes, whatever. But then once those safeties backed off, forget about it. The running game is still the running game. So that's the biggest difference this year. And even against UTSA, which has probably the best rushing defense in the American Conference. I mean, that's a big team. They give up 3 yards per carry. Like that's a good rushing defense. And I wouldn't say Army ran over them, but they did. They threw 17 times, completed 10 passes for almost 200 yards. Like if you're giving up 200 yards in the air, it's time to think about doing something different because you're going to lose.
So going into this game, do you expect more or less passing than the average of 83.2 yards per game?
That's a good question. We had a discussion about this on our show. I personally think that they might pass quite a bit because if you're Navy, you sort of have to come down and try to stop the run, or you're definitely going to lose. So, and plus, Navy has a pretty good secondary. They got a really good cornerback. They got a really good safety. So, if it was me, I would probably just try to come down, stop the run, play one on one on the outside, and hope for the best. And if that's what happens, then I think you're going to see a decent amount of passing.
So with Navy being 71st in passing yards allowed, if you had to pick one guy to lead the team in receiving yards for this game, who would it be?
Probably Noah Short, slot back. Um, because there's probably more ways to use the slots. I don't know how familiar you are with the flex bone, but you start with a quarterback and a fullback, under center, and then you have, instead of having slot receivers, you have slot backs, but they're still in the slot essentially. So the purpose of the flex bone is to give you like as much variability as you can in the offense. So yeah, they can do a lot with those guys, and most of the time the leading slot back blocks and the trailing slot back is ready to take the pitch. But if that leading slot back, instead of blocking 9 out of 10 times, you know, sheds his block, he's almost always open because it's now, instead of trying to fight off a block, suddenly oh shit, that guy just ran by me. Yeah. So that's this kind of what drives Army's offense. So yeah, I would say Noah Short would be my first pick for sure. And hold on, and I will tell you my second pick. Casey Reynolds, wide receiver. He's been a revelation for the Black Knights. Really good wide receiver.
So getting into the run game, Army's first in the country in yards per game and sixth in yards per carry. Navy's kind of struggled to stop the run this year with being 85th in rushing defense. With how familiar the Navy team is with this offense, how do you think they attack the run?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Another good question. These games are always low scoring because these teams see each other all the time and there's so much familiarity there. But in the past, one of the biggest advantages was Army and Navy both practice cut blocking, so their defenses practice getting off cut blocks, which is a monster advantage. I mean, I would say the biggest reason that cut blocking works against Power 5 teams is or Power 4 teams is because they just don't see it. It's not a thing that occurs at the higher levels of college football, right? Um, you don't try to scheme. You just let me go get a bigger guy. That's what you do if you're Georgia, right? So, um, Army and Navy, they used to practice blocking differently, so they would practice getting off blocks differently as well. This year, I'm very interested to see what will happen because Army's just going to block Navy like a regular team, and maybe they'll run on them like a regular team too. But in terms of playing the option, this Navy defense is pretty good at playing the option. I mean, I think that they'll have some success there. They should. You would think that they would see it enough. But at the end of the day, Army's got arguably the best offensive line in the country and certainly the best pound for pound. So, um, I don't know how. I mean, there's no scheme to fix that. That's just a reality.
So, switching over to the defensive side of the ball for Army, Navy isn't near as good as Army at running the ball. They're still eighth in the country, but with a significant drop off in yards per game. With Army being just outside of the top 10 at stopping the run, do you think Navy tries to throw any wrinkles into their offense to make some progress?
Well, their whole offense is wrinkles essentially. I mean, I don't mean that. That's not me being an asshole. It's that offense is built around misdirection. They run out of the flex bone, they run some out of the wing tee. They call it a hybrid wing tee, but it's like it's an option scheme designed to break dudes into open space. And early in the season, they broke a lot of dudes into open space against basically busted coverage. I mean, they beat Memphis on a handful of busted coverage plays in the first half. Bottom line, and I think they could totally do that against Army. I don't think it's easy to defend the offense. It's just as tape has come out and you know what you're looking at. I mean, I don't think Army needs to stone these guys at the line of scrimmage on every single play. What they need to do is not give up any explosive plays because that's what Navy's really good at is getting explosive plays. And if they do that, even if Navy gets into the red zone, like once things compress, then it's a little harder to, you know, make some crazy bullshit that's going to break somebody open wide. Like the field is just smaller. So um, that's sort of where I see it. I'm optimistic, but that Navy offense is very good. And Army has a handful of advantages, like the way that they scheme that Ben don't break style is heavily dependent on them also controlling the clock and being up. Army has had game control, had a lead in every single game they've played except the Notre Dame game and arguably the UTSA game. So for the most part, their defense has been playing with a lead, teeing off on guys passing to try to catch up. I don't know that that's necessarily what's going to happen Saturday.
So when it comes to passing the football, Navy is slightly ahead of Army in the passing game. I believe they're 131st in the country, but they do get 128.2 yards per game. But on the counter side of that, Army's top 40 in passing defense, coming in at 34th. Do you think Navy has any chance of taking advantage of the passing defense?
I certainly hope that they try because Army forces a lot of interceptions. Against North Texas, they faced Chandler Morris, who at that point had thrown like 4 picks all year and turned him over twice. Against UTSA, they faced Owen McCowan, who had like 6 picks. He turned it over twice. Against Tulane, they faced Darian Mensah, who had thrown like 6 picks all season. He turned it over once and just generally looked like he didn't know what he was looking at. Um, this defense is very, very good at getting the ball. I mean, they're a bunch of ball hawks, and especially down in the red zone when things compress. I mean, between the 20s, they play not to get beat deep because that's what you do when you're a 5'10" quarterback, cornerback who didn't really get any Power Four offers. You play not to get beat deep, but once the field compresses, you can play the scheme, and that really tends to work out. I mean, it's not like these guys are bad football players; they're just not, you know, necessarily going to the NFL. They don't have pro prospects. That doesn't mean that they're not good, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Um, so before we get to the last two questions,
Sure.
so you obviously went to West Point. We talked about it. Do you have a favorite story from this game that you'd like to share?
Oh, from this game?
From
Uh,
the Army Navy game.
yeah. Yeah, well, I guess, last year was this way off topic, but yeah, last year was probably my favorite Army Navy game of all time. They had it up at in Boston at the Patriots Field, and God, what an amazing. It was in the 50s. It was gorgeous out, and we went to my buddy's tailgate through this monster tailgate. My wife and I just got smoked. We were just absolutely drinking and just stumbled into the stadium. We sit down. I was like, all right, I gotta pay attention to this game for As for Football. And my buddy Matt sits down, opens up his coat, and he's got like all these flasks of Fireball in his coat. Then he goes, "Here, take these." And hand to God, I didn't know what happened in the game. Like I had to go rewatch the game afterwards. I knew Army won, but I could not have told you why. So um, that game was fun, and we're all sitting again together again, and yeah, it's just my favorite thing about Army Navy now as a grad, as a 51-year-old man, is just seeing my buddies and getting back together and getting a chance to like watch the team and just experience the atmosphere. I'm not sure that I would have said all that stuff when I was a cadet, but now it's just, yeah, it's just these are the people that I grew up with, basically.
Yeah, we right before I deployed like January 2nd,
Yeah, yeah,
and so this game was like the last time we got to go out and have fun before we went out.
yeah.
And my whole platoon went to the Hooters right outside of Fort Stewart
Oh,
and
cool.
just
Yeah,
got obliterated and watched
yeah.
this game. And a few of the wives brought their cars and drove everybody back to the barracks. And that is one of the big things that I remember every time I watch this game.
That to me is what Army Navy is about. It's not all the hoopla and the nonsense oh, the celebration of patriotism and take that stuff and shove it up your ass. Let me just let me just hang out with my buddies, and we just remember the good times, or don't even just sit there and just be together. That's what I love about Army Navy.
No, I agree because that was the one time we watched the game as like a whole platoon, and
Yeah, yeah.
none of us went to West Point. Like I
Sure.
was I was an infantry enlisted dude at the time,
Yeah.
and our officers went to like Bama and a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
other places. But e- everybody that cares about college football in the Army cares about this game, regardless of
Yeah.
where you went to school, which is one of my favorite things about it.
Yeah. Well, a bunch of the SEC schools, not surprisingly, you have a good football team, a good athletic program. You can put together a decent ROTC program too. So,
Yeah.
um, I, I think that that's not a coincidence.
All right. So, what are you most concerned about going into this game?
Navy has a very explosive offense, and they don't necessarily drive down the length of the field as well as West Point. They have punted 49 times this season versus Army's 22. And Coach Monken hates to punt. They just don't like, that's just not what they're doing. And so I think Navy's going to punt. For them to win, they're going to have to hit some explosive plays, but they can totally do it. So what I'm afraid of is, yeah, just some floopy thing out of the wing tee, coming off the American Conference Championship game and not that bye week. So you didn't have the extra week to watch up to a million hours of film on this admittedly very complicated offense that they run. Like they can totally do it, and they break. Blake Horvath ran for like 60 yards against Notre Dame. Like they are good at breaking those long plays. So that's what concerns me.
And what are you most confident in going into this game on Saturday?
Army's got better players, and they've got a better offensive line. Like if they can just play the game in a phone book and beat the snot out of Navy, then they're going to win. Bryson Daly is a senior quarterback, has really should be in New York for the Heisman. I mean, he's got all the accolades. Um, it really deserves to at least be in the room, in my personal opinion. And I think that they're going to find a way to win, like in the way that you want your quarterback to be able to look at the defense, think, okay, this is what they're giving me. Let me do this thing. He's shown the ability to do that literally all season.
Question about Bryson Daly.
Okay.
So I was told recently, one of my buddies is still a drill sergeant over at Jackson, and he
Okay.
somehow told me Bryson Daly branched infantry. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
It would be a shame of someone with that, if someone like him that can just take an absolute sledgehammer to the forehead and pop back up like nothing happened to not be infantry.
Yeah, they've done very well with placing guys in the combat arms. Army football has kind of a reputation for going field artillery.
Okay.
Um, but they've branched more than a few infantry, and they've done very, very well at getting their guys through Ranger School. So just in terms of like how is Coach Munkin doing at putting officers into the Army, he's doing very, very well, at least as well as any of his predecessors, just based purely on what those guys are doing in the field.
Yeah, that's that. Honestly, I know this is an extremely unrealistic hope, but in the off season, I would love to get Bryson Daly on the podcast. One, because outside of Army, he is a Texas fan, and as a Georgia fan, that's just horns down. But what he's been able to do this season is just insane.
He really has been a great player, and even you saw it even as a sophomore in that 2022 season. When they got up and they would put him in as the third string quarterback, he broke two 70-yard runs for touchdowns as
Yep.
a sophomore, just in garbage time. So, um, yeah, I think we knew that he was going to be a good quarterback, but obviously there's just no way that you could prepare to see what we've seen. I mean, this really is the best Army team since 1958. I mean, they're just that's just where we are, and it's amazing to see it.
All right, and last question. I think we all know the answer. I still have to ask. Army, 6.5 point favorite, over under 39.5. Who are you taking in this game?
So you know what? I'm glad you asked. I actually took a bunch of I put prop bets out on our show. If you can hang with me, I will look those up.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah, give me 1 second. I wish that I should have had that ready. Um, okay. So I said first half, uh, under 13 and a half, highest scoring half, second half, Navy team total under 14 and a half. Those are my
Okay.
three prop bets for the game. Um, I never really I try not to pick Army games against the spread just because I feel like it's bad juju. I
I
think
haven't bet on a Georgia game since 2019,
yeah,
and
it's you like to be analytical if you're gonna make bets, and
uh-huh,
trying to make bets on your own team is a little sketchy in my personal opinion.
I would
But
agree with that.
this game tends to shake out like the Super Bowl in the sense that teams feel each other out in the first half and then the gloves come off in the second half. So my props are kind of designed that way.
So I know I don't remember if I talked about it while we were recording or not. Bryson Daly, 2+ touchdowns, is
I would
positive money right now.
Yeah, I would bet that one. I
Done.
wouldn't surprise me to see him get three in all honesty.
I will say, it seems like every year, especially with what I talk about on the show here, I have something that I bet every week and
Yeah.
make a lot more money. Like 2 years ago, it was whatever team Southern California was playing, just the general over on that game. And
Yeah, that's a good one.
and this year it's been Bryson Daly, whatever the plus money is on touchdowns. The only
Yeah.
week that I didn't hit it is the week that he didn't play.
Yeah, well, it's tough.
Yeah.
I he so not only is he a great player, but the scheme that they're using really favors quarterback power in those short yardage situations. They've got this fullback, Jake Rendina, my
Hmm.
favorite player on the team, and he's like 6'1", 275. The dude looks like one of the Steiner brothers, honestly. And he's blocking fullback. He has maybe 20 carries this season. And yeah, they in the short yardage situations, they bring in Rendina either for the tush push or just to lay the wood and open up a hole for Daly. And it's been extremely effective. So yeah, that's been working.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to hit on about this game or just Army football in general before we get out of here?
I guess the one thing that I would say is to appreciate these guys as athletes when they're on the field. There's so much hoopla and just patriotic bullshit associated with the Army Navy game, and that's fine. Like it's fine, but I feel like sometimes these TV commentators get to the point where they just want to feel better about their patriotism during the
Uh-huh.
Army Navy game, and that these guys, listen, they're all going to commission, they're going to be great people, daily branch infantry, that stuff is great, it's legitimately great, but for the 3-4 hours they're on the field, they're football players,
Yep.
and they put in all the work to be Division 1 football players. And the one thing I would tell any new audience to Army football is to appreciate them as football players at whatever level they can compete, which is at this level. This year was winning the American Conference Championship, and that's good. Like that, that's I don't want to say it's more important than their service, but in the context of football, it's more important than their service. Their service is coming, and it will be more important in the long run. But for now, this is what they're doing. So
And I've been trying to plan a trip for years to get to the Army Navy game. Specifically, I told you, a buddy of mine used to play for the team.
yeah,
We've been trying to get it together for 4 years now to go to this game. And it looks like next year, the furthest south that I have ever seen this game in Baltimore may be the year. So if I
okay,
make it up for the game, I will be calling you.
please do. My recommendation. So there's two ways to get Army Navy tickets, and the first is to join the Army A Club and support the athletic association and buy tickets that way. The
Okay.
second way is to wait until literally the day of the game and buy them on StubHub from people whose plans fell through because they had to buy these tickets 6 months ago. Do
Okay.
one of those two.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So good luck.
Yeah. No, it's I will say I'll be freezing as someone who lives in Savannah, Georgia currently.
Yeah.
It
Yeah. Well, I was
is,
stationed at Fort Stewart when I was a lieutenant.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
It's I think it's like 48 outside and I have sweatpants and a sweatshirt on. Um I hate the cold. At the
Well,
Georgia Tech game it was 35 and I was mad about it.
awesome.
But I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. I told you before we recorded, this is one of my favorite episodes we do every year because, I love the game. It's
Yeah.
important to me as a veteran that this game gets
Yeah.
recognized because I feel like a lot of college football fans just kind of in passing watch this game, but I truly love it. I feel like other people should love it, and I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.
And I'm gonna close up on some things real quick if you give me a second, and then we'll
Sure.
be out of here. Follow us on social media, guys. If you've listened for more than one episode, you know all the links. But always remember, there is nothing finer in the land than a drunk, obnoxious Georgia fan.